Steve Cheney. I'm the CEO of the American Security Project, and I welcome you here this afternoon to what I think is a very timely topic. It's an unusual afternoon for me because I had my eyes dilated this morning, and with that light I can't see anything. I'd wear my sunglasses, but I wouldn't want you to mistake me for being Stevie Wonder. So let me talk a minute about energy security and the American Security Project. We were founded in 2004-2005 by Senators Hart, Kerry, Hagel, and Rudman. And they had a number of topics they covered: climate change, nuclear security, American competitiveness, asymmetric operations, among others. But energy security was probably at the top of that list. And they wanted to approach that subject from a national security perspective. And of course, what's gone on since 2005 in this country until now in regards to our energy is dramatic, and it's interesting. Of course, the worldwide situation has changed in amazing ways. So we wanted to bring together a panel to talk about energy security and Europe and what's going on there. So everybody knows what's going on in the Ukraine with Russia and that whole business and the latest round of sanctions. And of course, what's going on in this country with gas production and oil production. And I think this is a really interesting issue and a good one, and one that we need to expose to the public and certainly let those on the Hill recognize it as a national security issue, certainly for us, but even perhaps more so for those in the European Union and in Europe in general. So we've assembled a great panel here today. This will all be on the record. We're taping it. We'll put it up on our website tomorrow, so you don't have to all write all the notes. We will tweet it. We will blog it. I want to thank LNG Allies for your great support for this here today and helping us put this on. And I'm going to kick it off by handing it over to my senior fellow for energy and climate, which is Andrew Holland, who came to us from Senator Hagel's staff up on the Hill, and he does energy and climate for us as well. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm not going to do a long introduction. I'm not going to tell you all the things that we've done and said and talked about on energy security and natural gas and all that. I'm just going to direct you to our website, www.americansecurityproject.org, where you can download and read such things as our U.S. geopolitical implications, U.S. natural gas exports, and many other things. So go there afterwards and take a look at that, and you'll be able to see video of this starting tomorrow. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our panel, but first I'm going to introduce them. And we have a great esteemed panel here this morning. And you'll notice it's only 2 of 3 right now because Mr. McConnell is testifying on the Hill today. And we knew that there could be a time crunch, but you never know. Sometimes things are done in 40 minutes, and sometimes they take 3 hours. It looks like it's more on the 3-hour side. But he'll be here, and we hope he'll be here before he's up. He'll be speaking third. But just to introduce everybody, on my immediate right is Robin Dunnigan. She's a career member of the U.S. Foreign Service, currently serving as the Acting Deputy Secretary for Energy Diplomacy in Department of State's Bureau of Energy Resources. She's been in the Foreign Service for 22 years, served overseas in a variety of posts: Vietnam, Turkey, Cuba, El Salvador, and worked in a range of issues as well. Next to her is Ambassador Zygmantas Pavlionis. Pretty good? He was appointed to be the Ambassador of Lithuania to the United States in 2010. Prior to this, he worked in key positions with the Lithuanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of European Integration, and the Lithuanian Permanent Mission in Brussels. In 2004, Ambassador Pavlionis served as Ambassador at Large as well as the Chief Coordinator for both Lithuania's Presidency of the Community of Democracies and the Transatlantic Cooperation and Security Policy Department. I'll introduce Charles McConnell as well, even though he's not here yet. In 2013, after serving two years as the Assistant Secretary of Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, Mr. McConnell became the Executive Director of the Energy and Environment Initiative at Rice University down in Houston. We're pleased to have him come up here. Mr. McConnell has worked in many facets of the energy industry, devoting over 30 years to the global hydrogen hydrocarbon business with Praxair Inc. So with that, I'm going to ask our panelists to talk for about 10 minutes to briefly introduce the issue and talk about what the U.S. can be doing and should be doing on energy security, helping energy security in Europe. And I'd note that the title of our discussion today is Beyond Rhetoric, because I think there's a lot of heated rhetoric from both sides that is outsized to some of the reality. So what we want to do here today is talk about the reality of what the U.S. can be doing, should be doing, and what more we can be doing to help build energy security for our European allies. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Dunn. Thank you. No, I think you're on.
It's very topical, obviously. I think you can't open a newspaper today or go to every conference. It's a lot about Ukraine's energy security, Europe's energy security. But in fact, the State Department and many other foreign ministries around the world have been looking at this issue for many years. I want to go back to 2009 because it's a nice bookend to where we are today and how the bureau that I work in the State Department was created. So in January 2009, Russia cut off gas to Ukraine for the second time. But in that instance, Ukraine actually cut off gas to the rest of Europe that gets it through Ukraine. And several European countries were without gas for 13 days. I bring up that date because not long after, on January 20th, Secretary Hillary Clinton took office. And on her first trip to Europe, a few weeks later, it was one of the main topics of conversation that she had with every European leader she met with. It really influenced her view on how critical energy security is to a country's national security and how important it is for a country's foreign policy. So when, about a year or so later, it was recommended that the State Department restructuring, we create an entire bureau to look at the nexus between energy security and foreign policy. She was right there, and that's how the Bureau of Energy Resources was created in the State Department. So we've actually been looking at this issue and working with Europeans on European energy security for many years. Honestly, back before 2009, but our bureau has been in effect for 3 years. I think maybe I'll start quickly with Ukraine and what we're doing with Ukraine, move a little bit to Europe more generally. But since Ukraine is really the topical country, let's start there. Most of you already know the numbers. They get about 50 billion cubic meters a year of gas from Russia. They use about 50 billion cubic meters a year. Over half of that comes from Russia. Ukraine, over the long term, can become more independent from Russian gas, but they won't make it through this winter without Russian gas. So right now, Russia stopped delivering gas to Ukraine on June 16th. Ukraine is getting gas from a few other sources through reverse flows with other countries and its own domestic production. But the bottom line is Ukraine and Gazprom, the Russian gas company, need to make a deal before this winter to get the gas flowing again. The United States is not mediating the negotiations, the EU is, but we're working very closely with many of the parties involved, urging a solution that allows for Ukraine to pay its debt to Gazprom, its arrears, a market price for gas going forward, and a future payment schedule. So kind of the first immediate piece is getting the gas flowing again from Russia to Ukraine on a market-based commercial contract basis. But in the longer term, it would be good if in 5 years Ukraine can choose whether or not to buy Russian gas and isn't forced to. It is the United States policy that no country should have to rely on a sole source for any of its energy supplies. So we have been putting into place a series of programs with Ukraine. We're working with the Ukrainian oil and gas company, Naftogaz, on restructuring and reform. We're putting in an assistance package that will help with improving domestic production of gas. Ukraine's domestic production of gas has been pretty flat for about 20 years. So we're putting into place an assistance package to help increase production from existing fields. With USAID and the Department of Energy, we're working with Ukrainians on energy efficiency. transparency of contracts, a whole bundle of measures that would increase and improve the investment climate in the country for energy investment, increase production, increase efficiency, increase interconnectors with its neighbors so they could get gas from the other direction, so that in 5 or 6 years, Ukraine's not in the position it's in today. Now, the European Union also isn't as vulnerable as Ukraine, but it is still vulnerable. It gets about 30% of its gas from Russia, and about half of that comes through Ukraine. So, again, it is vulnerable, and since 2009, the European Union has been taking steps to improve its own energy security situation, and we've worked very closely with the European Union on many of those measures. They are working to identify and support financially infrastructure projects, which I know the ambassador will talk more about. So things like better pipeline interconnections between countries, more LNG import terminals so they can import LNG and have different suppliers of gas to the country. They've taken a step to unbundle energy transmission in the country. So it used to be that one company could own the production, the supply, and the transport, and the distribution of gas. They've taken steps to unbundle that. They've put into place anti-monopoly measures, anti-competitive measures. They've taken some very important steps, but there's still a long way to go. So we've been working with a range of our European partners, in particular the EU, to help them identify what are the projects, how do they need to get funded, how do you attract investment from Western companies to those projects. Secretary Kerry and Deputy Secretary of Energy Poneman held a US-EU Energy Council meeting back in May, where they discussed a range of options and a diplomatic strategy of how we could work together. President Obama was in the region, was in Europe in June, and met with regional leaders on this issue. Vice President Biden was there a couple of weeks ago. He was in Romania and Cyprus, again, where one of the main topics of conversation was energy security. I'm just laying all this out because it's very much part of our conversation with Europe. I can't have that conversation without talking about LNG exports from the US. It's something we're asked about a lot. So it is true that the United States energy position has changed dramatically. You know, it used to be conventional wisdom that by 2035 we would be importing 60% of our gas needs. And now, probably in 2 years, we'll be a net exporter of gas. So pretty phenomenal change. And all of that gas that we were importing is now being redirected to other markets. I don't know if you want me to get into the details of our LNG export policy. I can do that in Q&A. The bottom line is, in order for US gas to be exported to a non-FTA country, so a country with which we don't have a free trade agreement, a license is required. That process is governed by the Department of Energy. They've approved 7 conditional licenses. But the licenses go to a commercial entity, the company that's building the LNG export facility. And that commercial entity contracts with gas buyers, traders, to sell the gas. So what you'll often hear is, why doesn't the US export more LNG to Europe? It's just not the way the process works. You know, the way the process works is a company gets a license and sells gas to whomever it contracts with. But it doesn't mean that the change in our energy situation isn't already affecting Europe. Like I said, many billions of cubic meters of gas are being redirected to global markets, which gives the Europeans more leverage in their negotiations with the Russians. For example, every European utility, I think every European utility, has renegotiated its contract with Gazprom over the last 3 or 4 years, if not almost. So we can talk more about the ins and outs of our LNG export policy, but I think it's fair to say that already our energy position is affecting global markets just because of the gas that we're not importing anymore. Maybe just a word about our sanctions policy, because it's relevant. At the heart of all this is the desire to resolve the Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's not our desire to impose or continue sanctions. What we'd like to see is a resolution of the crisis, a diplomatic resolution. But we've also been clear that, unless Russia takes certain steps, we are going to impose costs. Yesterday, the United States rolled out a new series of sanctions, as did the EU, and the intention is to impose a cost on Russia for its current actions. I'll speak specifically to the ones in the energy sector. The Department of Commerce put in new restrictions on certain high technology exports that would assist Russia in its production of oil in the Arctic or offshore. So the intent is to put a licensing requirement on if a U.S. company is going to export technology or products that would assist Russia in this very sort of high-end frontier oil production, exploration and production, the company requires a license from the Department of Commerce. So, and the EU put in a similar restriction. It's on our Commerce website, and it's also on the EU's website if you want more detail. But I'm giving you a little bit of the detail about it because people will say, are we putting an oil and gas export ban on Russia? Which is not what it is. It's a very targeted sanction on the export of these specific goods. So I'll stop there. We can do more Q&A later and sort of an overview of what we're doing.
Great, thank you. Ambassador, we thought it would be really, really useful to have you here to hear about how, because of course, Europe is not one single market. The EU is not one single market for energy. But to hear from specifically a frontline state that is very dependent on Russian gas, to hear about your perspective and perspective from Lithuania. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting. Well, let me from the very beginning break the rules a bit, and let me start with the rhetorics. Well, forgive me, we are northernmost Catholics, we like it,
Yeah.
And sometimes for the country of my size, I need to speak big, to be very simple. And let me start with the history, what means America for us in the region. It means some kind of values, human dignity, freedom, well, including market economy principles, for which we, the Lithuanians, we've been fighting against the evil empire, and we've been the first to revolt, and we won. Now we shine, we grow, we are one of the fastest growing economies. But we had our own sad experiences when we defended those values in the region. I will start with the 18th century, together with Poles and Jewish friends and Russians and Ukrainians. We've been the first to adopt the first written constitution with all those American values. We actually more or less copied your constitution then in this of 1791. That was taken as an insult for some totalitarians, not totalitarian, then autocratic states in the region, because they didn't want us to reform according to American values. And they killed our empire that was existing for 500 years, by the way. It was the European Union of the Middle Ages, if you want. I don't know, is it a good parallel to make it with today's situation, but for some strange reasons, when Ukrainians were very close to sign an association agreement that would reform them according to our values, the same country, more or less, makes the same that they did with us in the 18th century. So it means that some third countries in the region, they don't like us to be reformed according to American values, according to values of freedom, market, and all those nice transparencies that you just mentioned. We have our own little sad events that we will remember this month. This month it will be exactly 75 years from Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that sacrificed countries like us, and also 25 years from more glorious start of the revolution. We called it Baltic Way. Remember the case when all Baltics were standing from one capital to another, protesting, revolting against that evil. We know thing, and we believe one thing that Reagan told, each generation, well, freedom is just one generation from extinction. And it seems we are constantly in this region fighting for that freedom, fighting for values actually invented here 200 years ago. So So this is my region, but if you look globally, actually, and that's why my experience with Community of Democracy helps me, well, for the last 7 and 8 years, we as democracies, we are simply dying. The number of us being reduced each year. We are becoming a minority on the globe. So it means countries who follow and try to create you know, their lives based on American or transatlantic values, we are becoming a minority. We are losing, especially after global economic crisis. People go crazy, radical, wars, conflicts. Well, you mean it. You just open the CNN and you see it. Well, and you know what's surprising for me, like a diplomat, that you know, for the last 200 years we've been fighting for those values on Eastern fronts. Today, when I came to Washington in 2010, I had to start my fight for democracy to be installed into American agenda on the Western front. I was discussing it with Americans. I was saying, dear Americans, it seems you invented democracy, so why don't you fight for democracy? It's not the Bush administration, it's America. It's your core values, by the way. And now, again, surprisingly, we, Lithuanians and other friends, we are fighting for market economy in energy. And here we come to LNG exports. I remember well, it was 2005. I came to DOE and I asked them, can you do something with, you know, global gas market to be created? Oh, they were very unhappy and they said, no, forget about it. Then we had a Vice President Cheney visiting Lithuania in 2006. He made a very interesting statement on energy security that scared Putin so much that he closed the oil pipeline that is fixed till today. A lot of technical problems, I think, should be there. But still, we come again, it's 2014, and we speak with administration, with Congress, trying to say, well, we believe American values. You know, sometimes we're dying for those values. Well, you know, we are called the bloodlands in some books, where you have the biggest number of martyrs who die for values, just simply unfortunate territory we live. But why? Why, tell me, why should we now try to convince Americans that this is American to create a global gas market? You know, that this is not so American to restrict flow of your resources to the market. And you know why it is so important for the diplomats? Because if you do not do it, you create artificial circumstances for dictators to build their own monopolies, to extract very big prices out of energy resources that you keep in your country. Lithuania are paying 6 times more for gas than you here with our little small pockets and salaries, and then they have money to fuel their armies, to attack Ukrainians, to shut down the planes. And isn't it important for America to see that you create that situation? You, by not allowing a global gas market to function quickly, you create those very good circumstances for those dictators who finally attack America because of the conditions great. So here turn out of rhetoric, sorry, to practical things. Finally, sorry, it's my hero. Now the practical things. I hear in America, look, geez, but we don't know where to export LNG. You know, you don't have facilities. Well, no, we haven't. In Lithuania, in 2 months, October 27, we will open our LNG terminal. This is a beautiful ship built in South Korea called Independence, just by accident. And we will be first in the Baltics that we will be able to import LNG that is more or less sufficient for the country consumption, but because we are very well connected with all 3 Baltics, it can be also, if needed, supplied to our Baltic friends. Well, I was then touring the Americans and American companies maybe half a year ago with my energy minister and my energy company and LNG. the answer we got, well, LNG is non-existent for very different reasons. Well, it's in the pipeline, you have some procedures, you have some licensing, you have a long queue of company and terminals waiting for it. But it's a long period of time. You know, it will take maybe 2016 for Cheniere, for some other companies, maybe 17, 18. Look, in our region, we count time by hours. I'm, for example, very much afraid of first weeks of August, because Putin is always going crazy in the beginning of August. You know, it's like this, you go to vacations and he's grabbing the countries, and he's now nervous, and he's now massing the troops very close to Ukrainian borders, and he can do it. Why not? He did a lot. You know, he crossed all the Rubicons. So we need it now. We need your visionary strategic statement, maybe of the president, maybe of the administration, now. Because I agree with you. Even statement, even rumor, even policy orientation, even if you build terminals, you know, in 2, 3, 4 years, it will make a big impact. Especially on those autocratic states who misuse the energy resources to create the geopolitical impact. I need it now, not tomorrow, not after tomorrow, not after midterm elections or not after 2016 election. I need it now. The same goes to Congress. You know, my whole embassy is reporting every day about those debates in Congress, and I'm lost. I'm lost with the bills. I'm lost with those debates. I need result, please. You know, I have a lot of congressmen coming and senators to Lithuania using our example to show on the hill, look, they have the infrastructure, we have to sell it to them. But, okay, I agree with it, but I need the result, I need the decision. There is no decision. Well, there are some decisions, but, you know, wait for November, wait for 2016, 17. Well, my term is ending next year. You know, I have to report to my president that I did something, you know, that benefits, and unfortunately, it's not so easy. Or, okay, let's be strategic. If Americans are, and they are the best really in strategy, if we lack terminals, so let's build some terminal for Europeans, you know. I go to my native Pennsylvania, well, we actually started to emigrate from Pennsylvania to America. In some places we have 30% of Americans of Lithuanian descent, like Schuylkill County. You know, I would love to have all those, you know, LNG whales that are now actually, most of them closed because of very low market price. I would love them one day to being able to export through the port of Philadelphia. We actually even signed the cooperation agreement with that port, to Lithuania, you know, to all those countries. And not only Lithuania, Poles will have their own LNG terminal in 6 months. Portuguese, Croatians are moving fast. Finns, you know, they will do it. Oh, Nordics are very good on that. So don't worry, you have the market. The problem is here. The problem is in Washington. So the sooner we solve it, the better. Timing matters. You know, we don't have 3, 4 years. We can cease to exist in 3, 4 years. It's serious. It's not a theory. It's not a rhetoric. It's, you know, practical and unfortunate facts. We are dying there in the East. Actually for American values. Actually for European values. Because all those, you know, people from Maidan, all those Ukrainians, for me, they are sometimes more European and more American than people I meet here. Sorry to be so provocative.
Ambassador, thank you. Very important statements, and your comments about Congress sound very familiar. From my time spent in Congress, the rhetoric doesn't seem to change up there. But I wanted, speaking of Congress, Mr. McConnell came from testifying earlier today, and thank you for taking the quick trip up to see us here. And we started without you, but I hope we didn't miss anything with you. And just 10 minutes to introduce, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, and we can go from there. So I'll hand the floor over to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did spend the morning in front of the House Science Committee talking about EPA regulations. I have to violently agree with you that the problem is in Washington. It's been that way for a while. But I think there's a couple of fundamental things that are really important in this conversation, I think. First, this whole gas situation in America is relatively new. The impact of hydraulic fracturing has absolutely changed the landscape. I can recall myself personally being involved with several investments where we were going to be importing natural gas here in this country, and that wasn't very long ago. That was less than 10 years ago, because we were all absolutely convinced we were running out. Now, I think that also puts a flavor on the fact that, okay, so we've gone through that wave of investments, not that many of them, but pretty significant, multiple billions of dollars, in several instances where that capital ended up being absolutely not utilized. And let me just say it bluntly, a lot of companies lost their shirt in a situation that technology fundamentally transformed. That's part of the market and that's part of the bets you make, but that happened. I think the second thing that's pretty fundamental in this conversation is the United States government, although some people here in Washington think they do, the United States government isn't great doing commerce. We have a lot of policies and platitudes that we talk about here, but the truth is companies do business, and they usually look at commercial transactions to spur investment and come up with a long-term business strategy. I might argue that the import terminal wave that went through our country, a little bit of a situation where they said build it and they will come, and they didn't come, and a lot of people end up losing their shirt. So I think the market over here is still sensitive to that. We went through that and it was painful for several. But as I look at the situation you described, it is very much of a global geopolitical implications. There is no question about it, and I think oftentimes here in our country, because we're in the world of abundance here, we don't get the feeling that the rest of the world has in terms of clear and present danger, clear and present issues that are going to drive it. And this isn't a game to be played about whether we'll export or not as a political tool. This is really about geopolitical stability. I get very concerned when people in our country beat the drum and talk about energy independence as our goal. I think that sends a bad message to the entire world, and it sends the wrong message to the American public. We don't want to be energy independent. We want to be energy secure. And that means that we've got policies in place, and we've got technology, and we've got commerce enabled to do business with our friends around the world in stable parts of the world that need to continue to have the wealth and the support of America. And we want to do that in a constructive manner. I mean, we can see that even with the constant debate here in this country about the Keystone Pipeline. We're talking about Canada, for Christ's sakes, not Ukraine. And we're having enough trouble with that, okay, because some people think independence is the goal. I don't happen to believe that's the case at all. I can point to several energy independent nations in the past 100 years. They're not good examples. It's certainly not what we want to pursue. But maybe get to the question of what you're raising here about you need it now. Well, of course, we can't get it to you now. It'd be great if we could, but we can't. It's going to require investment. It's going to require commercial transactions, capital to be spent, and markets to be created, and the whole will of your country and countries like yours that are in a situation that they want to do commerce. So let me give you an example of something that occurred about 15 years ago here in this country, and it might be a halfway decent roadmap or a model that we might want to think about. As crude oil around the world began to get discovered in places like Venezuela, in places like even Canada, where the crude oil was very heavy, very sour. Those countries needed to export that crude and have a place for the refining to occur. Our country at that time wasn't prepared to accept those kinds of crudes, although we had better than 20% of the overall world's refining capacity in this country. I'm talking about the mid to late 90s at that time. And so what foreign countries did, largely through state-owned enterprises, oil and gas companies, Venezuelans, Pemex, Petrobras, go down the list, came to this country and made commercial investments in refining capacity in the United States. Large amounts of what we see along the Houston Ship Channel with Shell, direct commercial relationship with Pemex. With Citgo, a direct relationship with the Venezuelans. And I could go on with several other examples. And what occurred was a long-term commercial agreement where crude oil from those countries would be supplied to those refineries. The refining capacity would be in place to do that work. The market and the outlet for those countries was going to be such that they would have now a fungible product to sell to world markets, which they wanted. And our companies in this country were able to make the investments because much of those investments were foreign investments, often paid off with discounted crude over a 15-20 year period. So what I'm suggesting is there's a commercial transaction here that will go far beyond politicians and political platitudes. That's not how commerce gets done in this country, never will. And if we can find those mechanisms for those long-term commercial agreements, two countries that are in serious need for this product, the whole process around the exporting of LNG to non-free trade countries, we're able to now elevate that discussion to a different level in terms of not national security, international security. And the process that can be supported by what goes on here in Washington can actually support commerce to be jump-started and moved ahead. I might even suggest even the barriers within our own country, whether they're regulatory or permitting or whatever the case may be, if we have a higher order mission in mind, such as doing commercial work with a good partner in our global world, then we can actually use the government process to help elevate that conversation and accelerate it for a real outcome. At the same time, we can put in place commercial transactions for the 15, 20, 25 years, because these are $4, $6, $8 billion investments per terminal, a bunch of ships that need to get built, a huge industry that we haven't participated in for all these years, because frankly we thought we were going to run out of gas until very recently. And now we're in the middle of something that we're trying to create on the fly. And I think focusing on the permits from the Department of Energy and non-free trade status is a small part of the stack of activity that's in front of us, and it's all about generating commerce. Putting those commercial agreements in place, having companies be able to make investments, and the most important thing that any company needs for an investment is a customer. There's nothing like it. You've got a place to sell your product, you've got some kind of a price to transact it at. I have to say, it's economics 101. It isn't that complicated. This isn't a political conversation. This is a commercial conversation. I believe that politics can help catalyze and they can help channel. I think starting at the beginning with commercial abilities for your country to reach into our country here, and it isn't just business development guys that want to work on other people's money, but it's real companies with real balance sheets that have a real desire to be involved in a global market. And I think when you have that circumstance in place, now you've got the essence of a deal. And with the essence of a deal, you can make an investment, and the market will very rapidly go toward what you're trying to achieve.
Excellent. That's great. Three good presentations that come at it from a different angle, but I think the common thread with all this is how energy is a strategic commodity. Natural gas, in particular, in Europe and Eastern Europe, but energy in general is a strategic commodity that countries can use as part of their geopolitical mix. And I think recognition that it is such is an important first step. It's not just a commercial relationship, it's a strategic relationship. I'm going to open it up for questions here in a second, so think of some, and we'll have a roving mic going around, but I'm going to start with a couple of questions for our panelists here. There had been starting with you, Robin, there had been a special envoy for European energy security for many years, going back into the Bush administration, and there hasn't been for the last 3 years or so.
Since we created the Bureau.
Yeah. So that change. Do you think that's do we need somebody who focuses specifically on this, or is that
No, so we, at the time that the Bureau of Energy Resources was created, that job, the Special Envoy for European Energy Security, came under the Bureau. I mean, what we basically went from was a Special Envoy with 2 or 3 staff to a Bureau of 95 people led by an Assistant Secretary. So underneath our Assistant Secretary, we had 3 Deputy Assistant Secretaries. The Assistant Secretary level person who was a Special Envoy, and the Deputy Assistant Secretary devoted together and their teams, including me, many more hours than a Special Envoy could have. So
to European,
to European energy security issues, which I do have to take, Ambassador, one thing you said. I really mean that the United States LNG export policy created the current energy vulnerabilities in Europe it's such a simplification of the entire process and the reality that it's a really unfair statement. I mean, in fact, I sort of just outlined everything we've been doing to help increase the energy security situation in Europe. So the work that the Special Envoy for European Energy Security was doing before was focused a lot on the Southern Corridor, which is the corridor of green Caspian gas to Western Europe through a pipeline that goes through Turkey and then along the south. I think it's fair to say that the Southern Corridor project wouldn't be where it was today without United States diplomacy. It's been something that we've been supportive of for years and years, and worked really hard to make a reality. And sort of outline all the other things we've been working on with Croatia to help establish a link between Croatia, Hungary, all the way up through Ukraine, interconnectors from Ukraine's southern neighbors, in between them, things like Baltic terminals. So, I also wanted to just add one little note about how, what Chuck mentioned about the commercial nature of LNG exports. I mean, it's just not the United States who has massive new production in gas. Australia is coming online. The Eastern Mediterranean is probably coming online in the next couple of years. Huge finds in East Africa. And there are a lot, it's very hard to predict where the natural gas market is going to be in 5 years because of what's coming online in the next 5 years. It's not just the United States that's contributing to that.
Chuck, I wanted to ask this as well. That I think that's an important point. And one thing that we should think about as Americans is that if we do delay on this, and if we don't, the infrastructure isn't built for these, we're going to end up being 3rd or 4th at the table, and nobody's going to want to buy our stuff. There's only so big of a global market for LNG, and do we worry that because of our slow-moving nature of our political process that it's going to undercut commercial?
There's a lot of people in this country that are absolutely delighted with the slow-moving process. We got millions of people in this country that have already drank the Kool-Aid that exploring for natural gas is a bad thing in this country. We have states across the country that have banned hydraulic fracturing because they think it's a bad idea. And the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of concerns out there in the general public. So this idea that we have this tsunami wave of natural gas that will be available to all of us for the next 50 to 100 years, and we make that assumption, and then we build a whole economic strategy around it, it's the same assumption that, as I referenced earlier, a lot of people made 10 years ago when we knew we would run out of gas, right? So you got to be careful. You got to cover your money, and you got to make sure that you're making good choices. But to the point that was made about the whole global economy, it's absolutely true. But I think the other thing that I'm fascinated with all the time is that many people in the United States still believe that we sort of control the whole world's consciousness in terms of energy and commerce and everything else. When in fact, if you look at where the growth markets are in the world, it's Asia, it's India, it's the Southeast. Gas and oil from the Middle East aren't even going to come to the United States in 15 years. It'll all go over to Chinese markets. It'll all go to Indian markets. And we're sitting here fat, dumb, and happy very often that we've got all kinds of abundant energy choices and we're going to decide whether or not we want to import more crude. Hey, look, the world's changing. And when we have 400 million people and China and Asia have better than 2 billion people, we're not in control of anything like the way we used to imagine things. And I think that's a big part of what we've all got to get our heads wrapped around on is it's energy security. And it's also the security of the places in the world, the ambassador's point here, that we don't recognize how important and critical it is that those people around the world also be secure. We're missing the boat. And that ought to be a guiding light for our strategy.
Ambassador is a small country in a dangerous, historically dangerous region. What's your perspective?
I also, I'm sorry if you know, my words were coming too provocative, and I should be fair. Ambassador Morningstar, Ambassador Pascal, they did a lot, and Secretary Clinton really with her 2 visits in Lithuania. The main item was energy security, like you said. But today, when we simply are under attack, our democracy wall, American created, or American also led, is under attack. We cannot make it as business as usual. This is not business as usual. It should be strategic, quick, now, because as I agree with you, some other countries, they don't wait. They just grab the territories. They grab the ideas. They push you out of the market. And I agree with you also. That's why we were coming here to America. We thought, well, if we're a NATO member state, if we now negotiate the biggest trade deal, on further deepening and dismantling all the barriers for trade, for us it's kind of natural that we trade as allies in energy resources freely, because in this way we support each other. And we get rid of that quite vicious and dangerous dependency on those totalitarian countries who then misuse the money, who then corrupt our officials, who try to divide and rule us. So it's kind of natural for the family to share what we have, and in this way survive. Because well, if we are not making it, if we are not making the deal on this transatlantic trade partnership agreement, if we are not creating this global gas market, it's a big question. How will we actually look in 10 years?
But the geopolitical pressures that you're talking about are very similar to what's been seen around the world over the past 100 to 200 years. And looking at it just simply through the lens of LNG exports is probably too narrow, in my view. As an example, European brown coal has been around for an awfully long time. And sort of the rage across Europe several years ago was that we'll shut all these coal plants down because they're bad for the atmosphere. So they built nuclear plants and then they shut all of them down after the tsunami because you're so worried about tsunamis in Europe, I guess, or whatever, right? But you got a situation where you've got natural resources. Coal can be converted to synthetic natural gas. Coal can be converted to fuels. There's a whole regime of technology that in some ways it's like going back to the future in terms of looking at that entire suite of a portfolio. Any energy strategy has to have a portfolio. You have to have a suite of options out there, and you ought to be able to take advantage of all of that. I think that's another responsibility we have in this country. is to bring that forth as well. It isn't just about lining up a bunch of boats out of Philadelphia, but it's about a comprehensive energy strategy that we can enable through technology here.
Just maybe one remark.
Sure.
You know, what I learned in America in those 4 years, you know, united we stand, divided we fall. Well, I agree about European problems. You know, that's why when it was very cold winter in 2006 or 7, when, you know, Putin switched all the taps, we decided to create kind of energy union. Lithuanians and Poles, they were the countries to lobby into Lisbon Treaty, the energy as a common policy. It was not even common policy, it was just national. Now we have it. For the last 10 years we're moving forward. But, you know, to make it very simple and again provocative, I don't like this isolationism, American isolation on energy. I like you there, I like you with us. I like you. I like you there, you know. So do it together. Don't close the doors from the world.
Right.
Because the world is attacking you and us, the Ukrainians.
Yeah, well, we talk about, when we talk about energy choices here at ASP, we have to look at the three sides of it. One, you have to look at the economics, you have to look at the strategic perspective, and you have to look at the environmental perspective. And there's pluses and minuses on every energy choice, and you weight those accordingly. But with that, I'll open up to questions here, and we'll start here, and then to Fred.
I'm just trying to, more in white concise, I'm just trying to untangle something. The ambassador said this wasn't a political issue, the exportation of LNG to Europe. It was a commercial issue. And if the right business issues were aligned, markets, partners, mechanisms, strategy, then it would happen. And then Robin said that you couldn't just export LNG. Companies had to apply for permits. So what I'm trying to understand is, are there not a whole bunch of American companies that are looking for the opportunity to take advantage of this European need for U.S. gas and applying for the requisite permits and looking for the opportunities to supply Europe with gas?
There's a line at DOE right now of 30-some companies.
And you can go online and see it.
There's a bunch.
So there are 30 companies, so why aren't they getting permits?
Well, now, wait a second. There's a big difference between spending $150 and applying for a permit and building a $6 billion LNG terminal. And so I think what we're trying to mention earlier is that to commercially put that capital in play, you have to have a commercial strategy around it. And many of those commercial strategies are hinged around the ability to export to non-free trade countries. That's the strategy, right? So you want to get your permit, and then you want to go ahead and go through all the processes. So I think it's a little bit of a cart before the horse. It's a little bit of the magnitude of the investment that's required. I think there's a willingness out there in several companies that want to move forward. But this is not just going like that and getting business.
But what I'm saying is that if we sense some urgency about this, couldn't we speed up the process of applying to giving some of these companies permits and then let them get to the next phase of it examining the commercial feasibility of doing it, making those investments? I mean, it just seems that, you know, you're talking about it being a commercial enterprise, but we have got to do some political stuff first. Why can't that process be sped up?
DOE, in fact, did take a step a couple of months ago to speed up the process, right around the time when they approved the 7th license. And as Chuck said, I mean, you can actually go on the DOE website, see the 30 countries in line. You can see, you know, how far, you can see where the 7 that have approved licenses, where their contracts are to, where they, you know, you can see the companies that are contracting. Often when Europeans ask us, you know, how to get the gas, you can see the companies that are trying to sell it. But it is a complicated process, and not all 30 companies are in the same stage of being ready to invest.
Well, then why don't you select the ones that are most ready to be investing?
That's part of, so it's guided by Department of Energy, so I'm not going to get into it, it's not in my office. But they have tried to streamline the process.
And well, I'll tell you what, the Department of Energy really doesn't have a strategic recipe and a fabric with which to do what you're suggesting. We're talking about the government making commercial choices around who's better or more able to invest, etc. And you're really, in some ways, outside the purview of really responsible government activity. You have to have a situation where, as you're suggesting, and some of the recent efforts moving in that direction, but I'll tell you what, 2 or 3 years ago, it was painfully slow because, frankly, I don't think the administration knew what they wanted to do. And then it became, we'll wait till the next election to pass something forward. And we spent 3 or 4 years here, maybe more, somewhat treading water in this country because we really weren't sure what we wanted to do politically. And I think the urgency and the sharp edge that situations like this create around the world, never waste a good crisis. Get going, right? Yeah.
Probably one of the easiest ways to streamline this would be to complete TTIP, and then all of the European Union countries would be under an FTA rule, and it would be deemed as in the national interest and move forward quickly. Fred, I saw a question here for you.
Fred Hutchison with LNG Allies. Thank you all for coming. I think you have done what I know that Andrew and ASP set out to do, which is begin to take us beyond the debate that we've had in Washington. And it's been a vigorous debate, but we need to move beyond where we've been. We don't need any more conferences. We don't need any more hearings to talk about the product. We need to get down into the weeds and start to develop some solutions. And I really like what both of you had to say about both ends of it. It really is, and what our little coalition is trying to do is to bring together both commercial and government interests to really get gas to Europe. And Chuck, I thought that your example of what happened in previous years could in fact be a great model for this. One of the problems that I think that some of the European countries have faced as they've looked at this is the volumes of gas that they individually need. Mr. Ambassador, Lithuania is how many people? 2.5?
3 million.
3 million people, as opposed to India or China or Korea or Japan that are in this market. So I think that part of what they face is, you know, and even when you add up with the Poles and the Croatians and the Portuguese, it's still not as big a market collectively, but it may start to get that way if you can work collectively. Do you see that being something that can happen together collectively with some of the other countries in Europe that have planned, either had capacity now or planned capacity for LNG imports?
Asking me, well, I would say LNG export is one of the most attractive words among all those who are now the attack. Ask Ukrainians. You know, they are also thinking about anything possible in this area. We are all speeding up our process, as all 3 Baltic states. Well, you know, they have different failures and successes, but they are all moving to that direction. I think Lithuania is exactly the example of you know, country beyond rhetoric. We didn't talk, we decided to build a terminal, and we have it. Actually, without even EU support, we just have it. You know, we are building it because we need it. We, you know, if we wouldn't have our own, for example, oil terminal on the sea, when Putin shut down the oil supply, we would die without oil. So we learned that lessons. Thank you, Mr. Putin. You know, he's usually good at making lessons. So we know that we need it. And you know, after this cold winter, we all concluded that we need it. You know, Brits and French, they will be big suppliers. Actually, we will be competing with them. You know, we are already competing with them when we knock to the doors of the Cheniere company, for example. You know, they have big contracts. Yes, and Asia will be our big competitors. But okay, do it small. That's why it's not so scary environmentally and so on. We need small amounts. Well, 3 BCM will be enough for the Baltic region. And, you know, and we can survive the winter. And we are those who inspire Ukrainians. We know. And, you know, we are the targets of the same KGB.
I'm surprised at how environmentally conscious Putin is, because he thinks fracking is a really bad idea, okay? Because he'd rather have everyone on their knees, right? And so I think this whole approach going forward is about LNG, it's about conversion of brown coal, it's about hydraulic fracturing, it's a portfolio approach to an energy strategy that, hey look, we love you too, right? And we need to be involved with that so that we can move that forward for sure.
Yeah, and it's about renewables and nuclear as well.
And I agree with Putin when we started our attempts to have a hydraulic fracturing refinery, because we have shale gas. You know?
Yeah.
Suddenly we have big green campaign launched by someone we suspect Gazprom. The same happened in Romania, Bulgaria. You just check the website. You know, Poland, and that's done for very clear reasons to get us down, make us dependent.
Let's do red glasses up here.
I have red glasses.
Melissa Hirsch, I'm a risk analyst, and I have two questions. One, the Department of State, this Energy Bureau, how much are you looking across this energy portfolio? So I'm hearing a lot about coal, I'm hearing a lot about LNG, but also in terms of creating a unified export program related to nuclear as well. So that's the first part. Is there coordination? So if you're going to do technology exports and licensing, is it coordinated? Are they looking at each different area collectively? And the second issue, I guess, is more to Mr. McConnell, which is when we can take Lithuania as an example, what role does Exim Bank or the export credit agencies or commercial lenders have? In my estimation, they should be able to actually help guide the process forward. And what role, if any, do you think they have here?
I want to pick your question first, please.
I'm not sure if your question is about the specifics of technology excellence, but in general, the Europeans have to make their own decisions about where their sources of energy. But we agree very much with what Chuck said, that it needs to be an all-of-the-above approach. And we've worked closely with many European partners in where they're interested in all-of-the-above approach in different areas. So we do have an office of renewables, we have an office that looks at energy efficiency, we have an office that provides, it's called the unconventional gas. But it works with countries that are interested in pursuing unconventional gas development to look at best practices and lessons learned. Again, every country needs to make its own decision, but like the United States, an all-of-the-above approach, you cannot say, it's very difficult to say we have an energy vulnerability problem, but we've ruled out X, Y, and Z, and we're only going to do this. So yeah, we do look at it very broadly.
A little bit to your question is, recently we've had some policy here regarding the Exim Bank that says we're not going to invest in any coal projects anywhere in the world because that's environmentally irresponsible. And that's a hard pill for the rest of the world to swallow in terms of the U.S. bringing forth clean coal technology that can be deployed around the world to really impact what's going on globally. Not to just pick the ones that we want to work on, but in fact what the rest of the world's very interested in. Global coal consumption is up 20% year over year for the last 5 years. The rest of the world is using coal. We have an opportunity in this country to provide technology leadership in how the coal will be used, not sit here and judge if they should use it or not, because your point is exactly correct. People are going to do what's in their best interest. And around the rest of the world, in situations like this, tapping into those coal resources that haven't been looked at for a long time is a very, very obvious next step. But we have to bring the technology for hydraulic fracturing to bear. We have to bring the technologies for these unconventional explorations that are possible, that are out there. If we don't do that, then we're not really having our space in the global economy like we ought to.
Well, and we've got another group in Congress that wants to get rid of the Exim Bank completely, which would be maybe more of this kind of isolationist stuff that you were talking about before. Let's see, I think we saw some in the back here.
Yes, hello. I'm Marie from the Atlantic Council, Marie Weisberg, and I know we've touched upon a little bit on the issue of TTIP, but I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit further on how you see the possibility of TTIP affecting energy security in the near future.
Well, I'll quickly jump on and say the laws, as it's written now, is that if you have a free trade agreement, then you don't have to go through the national interest steps to get a permit to export natural gas. So it's countries that we have free trade agreements with, Korea, Colombia. South Korea is the big LNG importer of this, the big consumer of this, and so you already see projects that are planning to send gas to South Korea. If TTIP is passed, then it'll be deemed to be in the national interest, and so therefore you won't need this quite cumbersome DOE process. Is that about what you say?
Just to contribute again, but the
Please.
problem is again the timing.
Yeah.
You know, I really thought after State of the Union speech of 2012 that in 2014, before midterm elections, we would be close to the deal. It's not happening. And again, domestic political implications are taking over in this country. We don't have political will to push it strong for very different reasons. Russians and Chinese are also working hard. Snowden, other files. You know, so it's good that it will be a chapter on LNG exports and all other you know, energy stuff, but when it will be done? 2016? Are you sure? Or maybe not? Again, elections, maybe 17? We will not survive there. You know, we need it. We need for the market price. Now, by the way, we found good Norwegian companies, Statoil, that will be supplying LNG. But we know that, you know, this is your potential. I am ambassador here. I know that it would be better for my country to do it with your own companies, and I'm lobbying for it. Sorry for that, but I think this is also your interest.
Problem TTIP and energy, anything like that?
No, it's exactly right. Right.
I got one down in front here.
Thank you for this very interesting panel. Leslie Peltier Guzman with Eurasia Group. I have a question from Mr. the Ambassador. So, you know, right now in the LNG market, LNG cargoes are going to the highest paid market, which is Asia. We are heading towards transformational change in the LNG market and potentially a lower pricing environment. It is going to take some time. So you don't have any guarantee that LNG cargoes will come to your terminal. And you know, last year in Europe, only 20% of the regasification capacity was used. So what kind of money are you ready to put to attract those cargoes? And what do you expect in terms of differential between the cost of importing pipeline gas from Russia versus importing LNG? And who is going to pay this difference? Who is going to be ready in your government to pay this price?
Well, for my government, it's very, very easy, you know, with most expensive contract that we could get, you know, and transport something from Louisiana, it will be 2/3 cheaper than the things we get now from Russia. It's today, well, we recently paid more or less $600 for 1,000 cubic meters. Sorry, the Russians made an interesting move. When they heard that the terminal will be operational, the mere rumor of that, they pushed them to reduce the price a bit. So it's already, you know, acting. So that's why I told that the mere statement of the clear visionary policy of this administration that we will do it now. You know, of course it takes time in Congress. It would already reduce a lot of, you know, price, and it would already create some market conditions. And so in any case, our price is much higher than we pay here. Of course, we will be competing with those Asian markets, but there is plenty of market for your companies here in Europe. As Andy said, now not only, you know, a lot of wells are closed, you are you are burning your gas actually in a lot of places because it's cheaper to burn it than kind of to use it then. So instead of burning, you just send it to us, and you have some kind of.
But it's capital in markets that has to be paid for. And so when you do that and you're making huge capital investments, you need long-term contracts, floor prices that allow you to recover your capital. It's not that complicated. I sold gas for 32 years, not natural gas, but different gases. And your story is very typical. As soon as you find out there's a competitive alternative, it's amazing what you can do with your price to retain your customer. It's not that complicated. And I think the point that you're making is we need competition. We need to bring that competitive element into this marketplace. It de-risks a lot of things because now you have a real market in place, not a monopoly. And when you have monopolies, you're always teetering.
And this is so American market. This is you.
That's why I think it's very fair to go back to what I said earlier, that in many ways, we're not importing the same amounts of LNG. It's on the global markets. That's already given European customers leverage with Gazprom. There are new LNG terminals coming online. The Southern Corridor is only going to be 10 to 16 BCM going into Europe in the beginning. But it's one more data point. It's one more new source of gas. And taken all together, it starts to change the balance, in the negotiating relationship, which I think is really important.
I'm glad you're talking about the Southern Corridor, because it seems like everybody's forgotten that we spent so much time talking about this throughout the 90s and 2000s, and then nobody's talked about it in DC.
We talked to the companies and the partners.
Good. We should remind people in Congress that exists. Let's do this side over here. I haven't gotten anybody from over here, so if you in the corner there.
Hi, I'm Georgette Spanjuk. I'm with ML Strategies, and we're working with a number of U.S. companies that are interested in helping Ukraine identify solutions for its short-term, intermediate, and longer-term energy needs. And I appreciate that a lot of the focus has been on LNG today, but I was actually hoping to ask a little bit more about the domestic resource production in Ukraine. So I guess first for Robin on the natural gas side, you noted the State Department's work with natural gas on structural reforms. But while the state-owned companies in Ukraine are producing 89% of the domestic natural gas produced in the country, there is 15 to 20 independent companies that are producing 11% of natural gas, which is about 3 billion cubic meters. So that's obviously right now a small drop in the bucket, but a lot of that is happening without the use of advanced energy technologies. It's all conventional, not to mention that Ukraine's civil service is sort of experiencing a changeover, and there are these policies coming out that could potentially hurt the private sector gas industry in Ukraine. So you mentioned that the State Department is working on an assistance package for increasing domestic gas production in Ukraine. I'm wondering to what extent that's focused on the state-owned companies and what opportunities there might be for the independent companies in Ukraine. And then on the coal side, and perhaps this is more for Chuck, the Ukrainian Energy Ministry has indicated that one of its nearer-term priorities is to look at the combined heat and power district heating system and potentially switch 98% of it is currently running off of natural gas and switch some of it over to a domestic coal fuel source. And I think that part of that is there are U.S. companies that can do that and do it with the highest quality environmental control scrubbers on the back end. But our foreign competitors, China, Japan, are approaching the Ukrainians and doing so with financing. And you mentioned the ban on public financing for overseas coal projects, but at the same time, the Treasury Department recently didn't veto, but sort of more softly opposed this Kosovo Sea project, a coal project, but didn't necessarily issue their veto authority. So as the IMF moves forward with its consultations on how the money allocated for infrastructure projects in Ukraine is going to be spent, is that something that potentially the U.S. government, the administration, and perhaps Robin, you can weigh on this as well, that we could see a similar situation for these types of projects in Ukraine, the position coming out to the way that it did on Kosovo Sea?
Okay, a lot there.
Wow.
On the independent producers,
yeah.
yes, we are talking to them. I just met with probably one of the companies that you're talking to last week for a couple of hours, and I know that they're considering forming an association. And we're talking to them not only about the work they're doing and where our assistance efforts can be most useful, but also about the new proposed laws and to help ensure that whatever emergency measures that are taken by the government over the next 6 months don't inadvertently affect the investment climate. So yes, we're talking to them. On the specifics of the reform work we'll be doing with the government, We're still negotiating with the government what it will look like, so I'm not really in a position to talk about the specifics. But when we are at that point, I'm happy to talk to you. So let's exchange cards.
So on the other part of your question, bottom line, I think most countries simply want to know what it is we intend to move forward with clearly and with a foundation behind it. I'll give you an example. I traveled up to New York a couple years ago with Secretary Chu, and we sat with a bunch of energy investors from all over the world in LNG terminals. And they were debating the issue, and at the end of it, the one guy said, you know, the problem we have is we're trying to put a political risk on building an LNG terminal on the west coast of Africa for the United States. And we really see the United States as a more risky investment. I was stunned. A more risky investment in the United States versus West Africa? And the reason why is they couldn't figure out what this administration really wanted to do. And that is, somebody mentioned punting earlier today. Maybe that was this morning, I don't know. But this whole idea that we're just kind of pushing things along, but we're not making a clear statement to our friends around the world about what our intentions are. And that is so powerful. But that requires political will. It requires a clearly thought out strategy. And you can't tactically mumble along if you've got a strategic intent. And I think that what's been described here is we have a strategic need for global stability. We've got partners around the world that need us to be involved in this equation. Are we going to be there for them? And not just because we're going to send them LNG, but because we're going to get involved with their technology. We're going to help them with their own energy strategies in their countries with technology that we can bring. And we're going to be proactive about it. And we're not going to moralize with these people about whether they should be doing this or doing that. We should bring technology that allows them to choose any of those energy choices in an environmentally responsible manner. We owe them nothing less.
I'm going to take 2 or 3 final questions and then give it to our panelists to have final things. So wait a second, but before we do, go ahead.
Thank you for putting the panel together today. I appreciate it. It's been very informative. I'm Brad Groders. I'm with Cheniere Energy. I want to thank Mr. Donnelly for highlighting the fact that this is a market issue followed by a policy issue. I think that's very important to know. And the ambassador had comments about how they need the gas now and that the U.S. won't be going online in the Gulf Coast for several years. We should be online by the end of 2015. The other plant that has full conditional approval to move forward shortly after, maybe 2019. But everything that's approved so far, the 70 million tons coming off the U.S. Gulf Coast, is sold out essentially. So everything has already been leased out through long-term SPA contracts. I think that was Mr. Donnelly was hitting on earlier. But that's what gives us the ability. They might be larger contracts, but to go out and put the infrastructure in the ground and build these facilities. It's extremely cost intensive, and without that SPA, we can't take it to the bank and get investments. And we are almost one of the companies that lost their shirt, like Mr. Donnelly mentioned, on the import side. So it's very, very expensive. Some of these projects are in the $11 billion range. But one thing I want to highlight, and I think Robin talked about it earlier, started to get into it, is even U.S. LNG going on the world market sends a strong market signal to Russia. And that's because everyone wants U.S. gas because we're indexed to Henry Hub. Everyone else is indexed to Brent crude. So that's what gives us that big cost advantage. And maybe if you guys could talk about some of the geopolitical effects on a broader scale with just U.S. LNG going to the market in general.
I think that's a good one to finish on. So why don't we go, Chuck, to me, so Chuck, you can answer that, and any closing comments, and then Ambassador, and then Robin.
Well, look, there's no big surprise that LNG at $4.50 or $4 at Henry Hub is a heck of a lot better than paying $10 or $15 or $20 somewhere else in the world. But if you look at the realistic aspects of what it costs to get gas there, run the numbers. It's not that complicated. You got to buy ships. You got to put these expensive terminals in place, not only here but there. And you run the numbers on the transportation, and you come up with about $12 in Europe and about $15 in Asia. Well, guess what? That's what the prices are. So it's markets already working from that standpoint, okay? Then, the other thing that we ought to be very, very careful about as we forecast the rest of the world for the next 50 years is that gas hasn't been $4.50 here in this country for that long. I can remember sitting here 5 years ago, and if somebody would have told me I could have got a forward strip for $12 for natural gas for the next 5 years for my business, I'd have bought it. Because everybody knew it was going to 20. Well, that's what the energy business will teach you. If you think you know anything, stop. Because you probably don't. And that's part of the portfolio approach, that as anybody moves forward, there is no single answer. If you think you've got one, be careful.
Ambassador?
Yeah, I would use the phrase gentleman from Cheniere used, sold out. You know, for some reasons it just bumped up in my head. We saw those sold out images in Soviet Union. You know, half of my life I spent there. I don't believe that this country, you know, is like the Soviet Union where it's sold out, because I know that the market is full of the product, but you're not able to deliver it. And you have a great demand. America is on demand now in global markets. We are waiting for the products, and we have long queues against, like in Soviet Union, you know, waiting to sell the products, but we're not able to do it. So what's happening to the market? We made a revolution in the Soviet Union. We attacked the communists, thinking that, you know, free market, this is the solution. So let's do it. Let's behave American in global gas market. And this is now here. This is the Washington to decide. And we need a clear vision. I agree with you. And we need it now. We cannot wait for elections. You know, too much of elections in this country.
Thank you. And Robin, final thoughts?
I think just to end on, President Obama, Vice President Biden, Secretary Kerry, Secretary Moniz have all made statements and put actions behind their words over the last several months of how committed the United States is to European energy security. And I think the record shows that we are. And so we'll continue to support diversification of routes, diversification of supply, getting the right market mechanisms in place in Europe. So when and if all of this LNG that might come on the market over the next 5 years comes on the market, Europe can hopefully import it at a market price and move it all directions throughout the country so that no one country in Europe is forced to rely on one supplier.
I think that's a good place to end on. Take a look on our website, www.americansecurityproject.org, to see video of this and video of lots of other energy and other events we've done. And